Mr. Leon Pereira.
Mr. Speaker, sir, my adjournment motion speech today will address the issue of ensuring a culture of accountability to students and staff at our institutes of higher learning. I was moved to give this speech by having met many young people over the years, be it at my Meet the People sessions or during my constituency walkabouts, house visits, and other events in the Serangoon ward of Adjournment GRC. Current students, teachers, as well as alumni have also reached out to my volunteer team and I to share their ideas and suggestions, which they often feel are not being reflected or heard at the decision-making level in IHLs. I'm proud of them for standing up and speaking up for the welfare and rights of their colleagues, their fellow students, and juniors. In this speech, sir, I hope to share some thoughts and proposals that have been inspired by what they shared. Sir, accountability is something we speak about in politics, but its dynamics at IHLs, which I will focus on for my speech, is quite different because of the power structures and rules in place, which is why my speech will focus on IHL boards and management being more accountable specifically to students and staff. Against this, it could be urged that IHLs are not democracies any more than companies are. Why is there need for some degree of accountability and transparency about decision-making? The reasons for why this is important may be self-evident to some, but I will spell those out. For one, IHL management, as with the management of any organization, may have blind spots to what students and staff need. An example is how mental health challenges faced by students are very different from those staff face, and different too from those faced by older adults. And unlike employees in a company, students cannot easily change courses or change IHLs, as doing so would have repercussions for their career progression. Secondly, giving students a say in their own education helps them fulfill their purpose for learning, which I believe for most people is broader than solely what their future employers want. We must recognize that IHLs are not merely factories to churn out economically useful graduates. The part of their lives that students spend at IHLs is often among the most memorable, precious, and formative of their lives. These experiences can help ground students and enable them to contribute to their communities in multiple ways later on in life, not all of which can easily be captured in dollars and cents. Ensuring that the environment in the IHLs is conducive to these journeys in character formation is vital to help ensure that those who pass through their portals become self-aware, self-actualized, and socially engaged citizens. Thirdly, being accountable means students and staff have greater ownership over their institution and have a better student experience. In economic terms, this could mean strong alumni engagement, which may translate into better fundraising capacity downstream, to cite one example of a concrete benefit. A good environment and a strong culture of accountability could also translate into the IHLs being more attractive to students and faculty. In other words, it could be part of that IHL's competitive advantage and collectively contribute to our national competitive advantage. As our IHLs seek to go beyond rankings, and this is a goal that the Minister of Education has said he seeks, they should also build a reputation for being great places for students, and this includes being more open, responsive, and consultative. And perhaps most importantly, an enhanced accountability culture at IHLs helps set the tone for creating such a culture across society. Sir, let me go on to highlight some incidents that suggest where the gaps may lie. I don't think these incidents that I'm going to talk about are necessarily representative of the institutions they took place in, and it is definitely not my wish to single out any particular IHL for criticism. But these incidents serve to give us a sense of what students and staff in IHLs feel could be some of the areas where the accountability culture can be improved. To start, there was widespread dismay among students at NTU regarding the hall allocation for the 2021-22 academic year. The release of hall allocation results on the 1st of July 2021 left many international students who had been staying on campus throughout due to COVID-19 suddenly homeless and scrambling for alternative lodging before the 15th of July deadline. Local students were similarly affected, especially Year 1 and Year 2 students who were supposed to have been guaranteed on-campus housing according to NTU's guidelines. A petition signed by 5,500 people was set up to urge the management to reconsider their decision. A day later, a statement was put out that more hall spaces were opened up, with space for students on the guaranteed 2-year stay guideline, as well as international students who were already staying on campus then. Student discontent with infrastructure can be found elsewhere. For example, out of the 30 halal options at NTU, I understand that many are vending machines. There are also only a limited number of canteens out of the many at the residential halls that have halal stalls. A media outlet interviewed students who said that they had highlighted this issue to the administration for some time. Buses at NTU are perceived by some to arrive irregularly. Anecdotally, wait times range from 5 minutes to 30 minutes. It is my understanding that the NTU Students' Union has highlighted bus-related issues to the administration in the past. Another example which speaks to the staff experience, during the pandemic, NTU initially made the decision to not allow students and faculty stuck overseas due to border closures to attend lessons online. Students were asked to miss the semester, and faculty members were asked to take no-pay leave should they be unable to make it back to Singapore physically. This affected students' learning and the teaching of faculty members, as many staff members had to cover for those absent. The National University of Singapore, NUS, experienced similar issues of a perceived lack of accountability and transparency with the merger of Yale NUS College, or YNC, and the University Scholars Program, or USP. The timeline for the implementation was short, with the announcement made in August last year. There was an early claim that the replacement NUS College would provide a liberal arts education. Then a later announcement said that liberal arts subjects would likely not be included in the core curriculum, to the surprise of many. The new NUS College has already admitted its first students as of August this year. There is feedback from some students and staff that there was no transparency in the end game for the merger of YNC and USP at NUS. The decision-making process was seen by many as opaque and with limitations in the autonomy for working group student representatives. So this was a decision that would affect student education and their on-campus residents, given that both YNC and USP offer programs that include residential components. Some staff had similar feedback, lamenting that they were given little opportunity to participate in the process. For example, the then president of Yale NUS College commented that the decision was only shared with the governing board in advance of the announcement for information. Mr. Speaker, so when reflecting on this and other feedback, I think the underlying perceptions by some students and staff can be distilled into two broad baskets. Firstly, some students feel that they are treated as economic digits, with IHL decisions made based on the return on investment. For example, some feel that the reason why infrastructural issues are sometimes not fully addressed is because there is no incentive to improve it. Students are not going to leave in the short run and will be forced to put up with this if they want to finish their education and receive their degrees. The second broad issue is the perception of top-down decision-making. Many students and faculty perceive insufficient transparency, consultation, and co-creation in decision-making. For example, IHL governing boards often have absolute discretion over student union regulations and all decisions made by the IHL. Many students believe that the unions have little ability to seek structural or policy changes, and decisions are often made without consultation. This was shown clearly in the case of the merger of YNC and USP. And when consultations are held, these are often non-binding, with the consequent decision-making being somewhat opaque. The same transparency deficit may apply to disciplinary action, say for sexual offenses. The case of Ms. Monica Bay is instructive and well-known. NUS had initially prescribed what was seen by Ms. Bay and many as a relatively light punishment for the perpetrator of a sexual offense, even after Ms. Bay had made a police report. The reasons and the process behind why NUS meted out that punishment were not made wholly transparent to Ms. Bay in the first instance. Another individual university student has very recently gone public about a case where she was the victim of a sexual offense, and she has publicly suggested reforms, such as, for example, the university providing reasons for the disciplinary action taken and to offer a right of appeal to the victim. The dismissal of Dr. Jeremy Fernando of NUS's Tembusu College has also been seen in some quarters as not having been handled well. None other than Professor Tommy Koh, then rector of Tembusu College, commented that the university had, quote, fallen short, unquote, as the process was opaque and there was a, quote, considerable gap, unquote, between the time NUS dismissed Dr. Fernando and when the rest of Tembusu College was informed. One last insight that comes through when reviewing all of this feedback and all these incidents is the perception that academics are insufficiently represented on boards of trustees, boards of directors, or councils, or in other words, the governing board. The view here is that the weightage of trustees in the education sphere, trustees who come from the education sphere, can be increased vis-a-vis that of business leaders, and civil servants, so that more well-informed views about educational quality, the faculty experience, and student life quality could be brought to bear on deliberations. I reviewed the lists of the boards at Singapore IHLs, and in most cases, I confess that I have some sympathy with this view. I think the weightage of educators and non-educators on these boards is an issue that deserves more study and thought on the part of MOE, perhaps drawing on international reference points. So let me conclude this discussion of some of the perceived issues with a few suggestions to address these issues of perceived accountability and transparency deficits. I hope MOE can review these suggestions and work with our IHLs to encourage them to adopt policies along these lines. Doing so would be in the interest of the IHLs themselves, as it would enable them to enhance their competitiveness and attractiveness to students and faculty. In my first proposal, I'd like to talk about empowering rank and file faculty in university senates or oversight bodies. Typically, senates or president's councils have strong representation from senior university administrators and less representation from the faculty rank and file. This could be seen as there being little separation between the president or provost and faculty members who can provide oversight. To illustrate this point with a question, do we know how many times other Senate members succeeded in making their president or provost reconsider certain decisions? In the various incidents I referred to earlier, what roles did university senates play and what roles were they able to play? In many universities across the world, it is not always or perhaps often that university administrators lead senates which are supposed to provide oversight over executive decisions. Restructuring and opening up senates to more rank and file faculty could improve oversight. One area where this may be helpful is on the issue of academic freedom. I filed a parliamentary question on this earlier this year, referring to the results of a survey undertaken among academics, which suggested that there may be a significant proportion of academics in our IHLs who feel concerned about the state of academic freedom here. A survey which, by the way, should be looked into and where further research to validate it should be done in the best interests of cultivating a strong academia here. So my second proposal is to grant a student union representative and a representative of rank and file faculty a seat on the governing board as a voting member or at least a non-voting observer. This ensures that the voices of students and staff can be directly represented in the decision-making process, which in turn promotes inclusive decision-making that actively considers the views of all stakeholders. Even if student and staff representatives on the board are not given veto powers, such a move creates greater transparency. The practice of granting student unions and staff a seat on the governing board is not by any means novel. Already at least 13 of the top 50 universities in the latest QS World University Rankings from Hong Kong, North America, Europe, and Australia have adopted this practice. Singapore's IHLs can and should do this too. In some universities, the governing board is required to have student and faculty members who are elected to that role by their peers. Thirdly, I propose mandating IHLs to consider petitions above a set number of signatures. Doing so serves the following two functions. For the university population, it legitimizes petitions as a tool for policy change by providing certainty that such petitions will at the very least be considered by decision makers at IHLs. For the IHLs, it serves as a filter mechanism that prevents unnecessary consideration of frivolous petitions. Such a move should prevent a repeat of what happened to students representing fossil-free Yale NUS and students taking action for NUS to divest, respectively. In March 2019, these two student groups calling on NUS to divest from fossil fuels were granted a meeting with NUS administrators after making such a request for 6 months, only to be told that their petition, which had garnered nearly 800 signatures, was not enough to show substantial support for divestment. This raises the question of what number of signatures is enough. Creating a requirement for IHL management to address petitions with a sizable number of signatures would strengthen accountability and transparency. One happy side effect of such a system is that it may also help students learn about how they can be active and involved citizens in a democracy. Fourthly, I propose simplifying the process for setting up new student interest groups. For many students, campus life is a defining feature of their time in university, Interest groups are one of, if not the biggest contributor to a vibrant campus life. When students' interests and passions are not served by existing interest groups, they should be empowered and facilitated in setting up their own. Could the registration windows be extended or made more frequent? Or perhaps could registrations be accepted on a rolling basis, as is, from what I understand, currently the case with SMU, but not the case with some other IHLs? Could IHLs also make available to students a model club constitution, so to speak, to make setting up a new group easier? Lastly, for my last proposal, I would like to say that we need to learn from not just mistakes or gaps, but also places of strength. For example, when the Singapore Management University, or SMU, was founded just over 2 decades ago, in 2000, and was facing the challenge of how it should brand itself and create a school culture, it took only 3 years before they set up Singapore's first formal peer helping program in a university. This was at a time when mental health was nowhere near receiving the public and institutional attention that it now receives. Mental health for youth, I should say. While the impact on employability and other standardized metrics of peer support may not be clear, talking to students and studying feedback on this program, I think it is clear that the student response has generally been supportive of the program. There are now 1,200 qualified peer helpers, with 200 helpers being trained each year. This is a good example of how IHLs can make positive change quickly and effectively by just listening to the voice of students. To take another example, I believe in the wake of a spate of sexual offences and sexual misconduct incidents in some of our IHLs, some IHLs now have a more robust approach specific to sexual misconduct, but some have proposed further reforms. I think some degree of collective experience sharing would help codify how IHLs take in and act on student and staff feedback on issues related to sexual misconduct and other types of issues. Therefore, in addition to my earlier proposals, I would like to suggest that more be done to share best practices among IHLs and encourage leveling up, particularly in regards to the domains of feedback handling, accountability, and the campus experience of students and staff that I have talked about today. To conclude, Mr. Speaker, sir, our IHLs are to some degree a microcosm of our society. The environment we create there will have ramifications for the character development of our students, which in turn will play a huge role in determining the course that our nation takes in the decades ahead. The proposals I've made to strengthen accountability and transparency at IHLs would also set a good example for the tone we want in a wider society. By giving them more scope to make a difference in their IHL, through feedback and activities like creating petitions, we would be better equipping and encouraging our IHL students to become better citizens of Singapore in the years ahead. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, sir, if I may respond to Mr. Leon Pereira's adjournment motion. Mr. Leon Pereira have said many things, many of which we can all agree. But I would say that we would also take a very nuanced position on some of the points that he has made. First, Mr. Leon Pereira's speech can be summarized into one of accountability. And I agree. We should promote accountability. And I'll elaborate more on this. But before I go into that, I was a bit intrigued by Mr. Leon Pereira's many examples, and yet he prefaced all his comments that what he highlighted may not be representative of our IHL states. So I wasn't very sure if Mr. Leon Pereira meant what he said, or he accepts that what he said is not representative of our IHLs, and that certainly our IHLs have room to improve. So I'll take it that in the spirit that Mr. Leon Pereira is trying to help us improve our IHLs administration, and what he says is not representative of the state of our IHLs. And I take this in good spirit. I, for one, will be the first to agree with Mr. Leon Pereira that all our institutions, IHL including, have room to improve, and we will certainly take into account many of the comments that he said. My next point have to do, and let me clear the deck first, on some of the statistics and the survey that Mr. Leon Pereira cited again on academic freedom. I believe my second minister, Dr. Maliki, have previously replied this in the PQ. And I would be one to say that I would take all surveys very carefully. When surveys say that we have done well, I remind my people to never let this get into their head. When surveys say that we have not done as well, we don't take it to heart personally, but we always remind ourselves that there's room to improve. But I always remind ourselves and my team that we should look at all surveys holistically and understand the purpose behind a survey, the scope of the survey, and what does it really tell us and not tell us. So I would suggest that we take all these statistics and survey very carefully. On the ranking of our IHLs, some of the rankings ranked us very well. Some of the ranking don't rank us so well. And the difference is because they all measure different things. And for us, as a portfolio of institutions, we must have the responsibility and the confidence to know what we are looking for in our IHLs beyond a narrow set of metrics, be it publications in selected journals or so forth. It must also encompass student development, faculty development, how they use their resources well, and so forth. So that's my point on cautioning us to be careful about using surveys that measure partial statistics to reflect a wider point. But I'd like to come back to what Mr. Leon Pereira led off first, which is the issue of accountability and participation by faculty and students. What we certainly agree is, indeed, we will continue to enhance the accountability and also the participation of faculty and staff in all our institutions, from government to IHLs. I think we can all agree on that. But where we are a bit more nuanced, that means the Leon Pereira presentation, is this. Accountability by the leaderships must mean the following. Not just accountability to a certain group of students to meet what they desire or want. Accountability must mean a fair consideration of the holistic demands across the diversity of students, not only in this generation, not only a select group of stakeholders, but for this generation, across diverse student groups and across different generations. That is accountability. That is the concept of stewardship. The fact that some students or some group of students at some point in time did not get what they want does not equate to a failure in accountability. It may be a failure to share, as you have suggested, the considerations, but to suggest that just because some people did not get what they want or have their needs fulfilled is a failure of accountability, that I think would not be how you and I would characterize the situation. I think we can agree on that. But I want to come back to this concept very importantly. Participation, consultation must not just be with select stakeholders. In any large organization, be it in the government, or even in your town council, or in our town councils, or in any institutions, we must consider the stakeholder needs of the entire stakeholder groups that we are dealing with. Make a considered decision and take leadership responsibility to explain those decisions. It is not leadership. Accountability is not about just making nice speeches to try to make some groups of people happy and find out that either it's inconsistent across time or inconsistent across group. That is the true spirit of accountability. So for many of the points that Mr. Leon Pereira mentioned, I would agree that there's room for our IHLs to improve. But I want to make a distinction to not say that just because of these isolated incidents, which in your words may not be representative of our IHL, and therefore they have not been accountable. So I want to make that point. We thank Mr. Leon Pereira also for your various suggestions on how our IHLs can improve. Empowering the rank and file, we agree on that. And in fact, indeed, many of our IHLs have mechanisms to consult their rank and file and make them participate in various decision bodies and decision mechanisms. Now, that doesn't mean that just because they are not in the board, therefore, there is no such mechanism. I'll give an example. In Nanyang Polytechnic, they have a student senate. They don't sit on the board, but they give their feedback, and there are different channels of feedback for different issues, for different levels of accountability. Surely, on one example, if we are setting school fees, the responsibility of the management and the leadership must not just be to a certain group of students, but to the diverse stakeholders, including the people who fund them, and also across the different generations. There are issues that we can have more students' participation, but there will also be issues which I don't think will be appropriate for students' participation, and I think we can agree on that. Second example, student rep in various governing boards, I think I have addressed that. Second thing, petitions to be taken seriously set above a certain number. I would have a slightly nuanced position. I don't think setting a number is necessarily the correct thing. In fact, the correct thing for us to do, and that's what we have been doing, is that we take every issue, every feedback seriously, regardless whether it has reached a certain threshold of numbers. An issue that has many people chiming in to say that that is a good thing does not necessarily make it the most urgent issue. On the other hand, an issue with very few or much fewer people chiming in also doesn't mean that that is a not important issue. What we need to do is not to go on a mechanistic way and say whether this is or not an important issue. Listen to every feedback seriously, give it due consideration, and ask ourselves, how do we make the best decision, not just for the individuals who say so, but for the diverse stakeholders in the university compound and the ecosystem, and the diverse stakeholders across different generations. That is the burden of leadership. Next, the new student interest group. I think this one is an easy one. We can all agree. We try to help people to set up new interest groups. And I like this because I want students to take on leadership responsibility. But having said that, when you set up a group, just like the debate prior to the adjournment motion, we must have some rules on what should be supported and what should not be supported. Just as the debate have said, this must be a safe space for students to interact, to debate. But it cannot be a space whereby you set up any interest group that impinge on the interests of other groups. So there are some basic rules. But in general, we agree with the spirit that we should have more students taking leadership because this is how they grow.
Minister Chan, you have about 2 minutes.
And my final response is that on the speed of good practices, you can be rest assured it goes from the board level all the way down to every level. Today, all our 6 AUs, their presidents and the chair of their board meet regularly to share the best practices, not just to share the best practices, but on how they can work as an integrated team to compete as one team Singapore rather than competing amongst themselves. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, I thank Mr. Leon Pereira for your various suggestions, and we'll take them to heart seriously, but I will emphasize this. Accountability means the understanding of diverse stakeholders' interests, not just in the current ecosystem, but also across generations. And I expect the leadership of my IHL to exercise their leadership responsibilities to make sensible decisions on what are the things to consult and what are the things that they cannot consult everyone, but have to take on that leadership responsibility to decide and subsequently explain those decisions clearly to their people. That is leadership. Leadership is not just about saying the nice things to people to make them happy without telling them the consequences. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question is that Parliament do now adjourn. As many as have that opinion say aye. To the contrary, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.